Chemosh. Chemosh was the national god worshipped by the Moabites, a people who lived east of the Dead Sea and often interacted with the Israelites. He is mentioned several times in the Bible, including in 1 Kings 11:7 and Jeremiah 48:7-13. Chemosh was believed to be a god of war and destruction, and his worship included practices considered thoroughly immoral by the biblical authors, most notably human sacrifice, especially the sacrifice of children. These sacrifices were seen as an abomination and a severe violation of God's laws.
O Chemosh, start the force of light to our enemies. Give evil.
In contrast to the one true God in the Bible, Chemosh had no real power or moral authority. His worship symbolizes the turning away from God to harmful and destructive beliefs and practices. The Bible frequently condemns Chemosh's worship because it violates foundational biblical ethics and leads people into sin. The golden calf. The golden calf is one of the most famous false gods in the Bible.
You will make a god for us. A god of gold. A golden calf!
Appearing in Exodus 32. When Moses ascended Mount Sinai to receive the 10 Commandments, the Israelites grew restless and impatient. In his absence, they collected their gold and fashioned a calf out of it to worship. This calf became a physical idol, a representation of a god that was completely man-made. Worshipping this idol directly violated God's commandment not to create and worship graven images or idols. The golden calf had no power or divine presence. It was simply an object shaped by human hands. This event demonstrated Israel's struggle with faithfulness and obedience. The worship of the golden calf is a classic example of idolatry, where people put their trust and worship into something made of wood or metal instead of the living God. Dagon. Dagon was a prominent god of the Philistines, a group frequently in conflict with Israel. He is mentioned in Judges 16 and 1 Samuel 5. Dagon was associated with grain, agriculture, and fertility, acting as a god who supposedly controlled crop growth and harvests. According to the biblical narrative, when the Ark of the Covenant was captured by the Philistines and placed in Dagon's temple, the statue of Dagon fell and broke, signifying the impotence of this god compared to the God of Israel. The worship of Dagon involved idolatry, and he is classified as a false god because he had no real divine power or authority. The Bible uses stories about Dagon to emphasize that the gods of surrounding peoples were powerless idols. Adrammelech and Anammelech. Adrammelech and Anammelech appear in 2 Kings 17:31-33 as gods worshipped by the people of Sepharvaim, a city in Assyria. They are described as sun and moon gods, representing celestial bodies. The Bible specifies that worship of these deities included detestable acts, such as child sacrifice, which was forbidden to the Israelites and condemned as an abomination. Because these gods demanded such immoral offerings and had no real divine authority, they are categorized as false gods in the biblical text. Their worship shows how surrounding cultures often combined religion with harmful practices, contrary to the ethical instructions given to Israel. Queen of Heaven, Ishtar. The Queen of Heaven, commonly identified with the Babylonian goddess Ishtar, was worshipped in ancient Mesopotamia and referenced in the Bible, especially in Jeremiah 7:18 and 44, 17-19. She was associated with love, war, fertility, and the sky. The biblical text condemns the worship of the Queen of Heaven because it involved idolatrous rituals and offerings, which diverted people away from the worship of the one true God of Israel. These practices often included burning incense and making sacrifices in her honor. The Queen of Heaven had no authentic divine power, and instead represented human inventions that led people away from biblical faith. Asherah. Asherah was a major Canaanite goddess connected to fertility, motherhood, and sometimes regarded as the consort of the god Baal. She appears in various parts of the Old Testament, including Exodus 34:13 and Judges 3:7, where Asherah poles are mentioned. These poles were wooden symbols set up in places of worship as a form of idol or sacred object. Worship of Asherah was forbidden because it constituted idolatry and led Israel away from exclusive worship of the God of Israel. Asherah's worship involved rituals inconsistent with biblical teachings and was condemned for promoting false beliefs and practices. Despite being revered in pagan cultures, Asherah had no real divine authority. Molech, or Molech, was a false god worshipped by the Ammonites and apparently some Israelites. Mentioned in Leviticus 18:21 and 2 Kings 23:10. He is notorious for being associated with the sacrifice of children by fire, a practice strictly forbidden and condemned in the Bible. This cruel ritual involved parents offering their own children to Molech in a desperate attempt to gain his favor or blessings. The Bible declares this sacrificial act an abomination and forbids it outright. Molech, as a false god, represents the rejection of God's commands and a turn toward horrific pagan rituals that have no basis in divine truth or power. Rimmon. Rimmon was a weather god worshipped by the Syrians, mentioned in 2 Kings 5:18. He was believed to control storms, rain, thunder, and other natural forces. People prayed to Rimmon to bring favorable weather or protect them from storms. However, the Bible presents Rimmon as a false god, emphasizing that he had no actual power over nature or history. Unlike the true God of Israel, who controls all creation, Rimmon was powerless. Worshipping Rimmon is condemned as idolatry that leads people away from trusting in the living God and his sovereignty over the natural world. Baal was one of the most well-known gods in the ancient Near East.
O Baal, we call upon you! Come down among us! We plead with you!
Worshipped widely in Canaan. He was considered the god of storms, fertility, and agriculture. Baal's worship rituals often included immoral behavior and idolatry, such as temple prostitution and false sacrifices. The prophets of the Old Testament, notably Elijah, strongly condemned Baal worship because it diverted Israelites from worshiping the one true God. Baal had no real power, and was a false god because his worship was based on deception and led people into sin. Sukkoth Benoth. Sukkoth Benoth is mentioned briefly in 2 Kings 17:30, as one of the gods worshipped by foreign peoples resettled in Israel by the Assyrians. Although the Bible does not provide many details, Sukkoth Benoth was likely a Babylonian or Samaritan goddess. Her worship, like other false gods, involved idolatry and false religious practices that were strictly forbidden in Israel. Sukkoth Benoth had no real divine power or authority, and symbolizes the danger of adopting pagan gods from neighboring cultures. Tammuz. Tammuz was a Mesopotamian god associated with fertility, agricultural cycles, and seasonal rebirth. He is mentioned in Ezekiel 8:14, where the prophet sees women mourning for Tammuz outside the temple in Jerusalem. This mourning was part of pagan fertility rites that the Bible condemns. Tammuz represents human attempts to influence nature through ritual rather than relying on God. As a false god, Tammuz had no actual power and was part of the idolatry that led Israel away from faithfulness. Gad. Gad was a deity associated with fortune or luck. Mentioned in 1 Chronicles 14:12. Some Israelites turned to Gad for good luck or blessings, rather than trusting God alone. The Bible condemns this reliance on luck or fortune gods as idolatry, emphasizing that only the one true God can provide real protection and success. Gad was a false god because he offered no genuine help or blessing, making belief in him a misplaced faith. Nisroch. Nisroch was an Assyrian god, mentioned in 2 Kings 19:37, known mainly as the deity in whose temple King Sennacherib prayed before his assassination. Little else is detailed in the Bible about Nisroch, but he was likely associated with agriculture or divination. Nisroch is considered a false god because, like others, he had no real divine power or authority, and his worship represented turning away from the true God. Nergal. Nergal was a Babylonian god of war, pestilence, and the underworld. While not mentioned directly by name in biblical narratives, Nergal was identified as part of the Babylonian pantheon and referenced indirectly through mentions of Babylonian idols and false gods. Worship of Nergal was associated with fear, death, and destruction, which contrasted sharply with the life-giving power of the one true God. Nergal's worship is considered false because it represented superstition and idolatry without any true divine authority. Sikkuth. Sikkuth was a Babylonian god mentioned in 2 Kings 17:30. He was one of many foreign gods worshipped by the people brought to Israel by the Assyrians. Like other false gods, Sikkuth was without real power or authority, and was part of the pagan religious practices that the biblical writers condemned. Worship of Sikkuth represents how idolatry distracted people from the true God and his commands. Astoreth. Ashtoreth. Astoreth, also called Ashtoreth, was a goddess worshipped in several ancient Near Eastern cultures. including the Canaanites and Phoenicians. She is mentioned in 1 Samuel 7:3 and 2 Kings 23:13. She was connected to fertility, war, and sexual rites. Worship of Ashtoreth involved immoral and idolatrous practices, which directly contradicted biblical teachings. The Bible condemns Ashtoreth as a false god because her worship led people away from faithfulness to God and promoted false and harmful religious customs. Get ready for a fast-paced journey through the Bible like never before. Up next, discover the meaning behind every single book, each explained in just one clear sentence. In under 14 minutes, you'll unlock the whole story from Genesis to Revelation, making it simple to remember and understand. Stay tuned and see how every part fits together.